Well, since I don't have a personal Twitter account, I always just log in through
just in Nordic I didn't want to ever sitting one with black and orange glasses, so in case you want to afterwards just that's a gender report. The new one, the one who is responsible for gender identity.
Thanks.
So good luck. Okay, and this is from the Transgender Europe, sorry.
Okay, nice to meet you. I'm Annika Saarikko from Finnish Parliament.
Yeah, she's going to be next minister in 2 weeks. Yes. Okay. So, yeah, and Ulrika, of course. Please introduce yourselves as that's interesting. Nice to meet you.
I'm Annika Saarikko from Finnish Parliament.
Hi, Richard from Engineer. Hey! Sä oot varmaan enemmän eduskuntatalossa.
No niin, ja sä oot puoluekansankerissa.
Kiitos kutsusta. Joo, ja
mä en kerkeä jäämään siihen, että mä joudun istumaan, koska kapea hallituspohja, koska äänestykset, niin
Varsapuistikossa on asfalttiin piirretty hallitus alas. Joku, se en ollut minä.
Minä siis sanon itse kuitenkin.
Enkä ottanut edes kuvaa.
Tulevat tasavalministeri.
Joo, Annika Saarikko, hei.
Tasavaltuutettu Jukka-Maria Vanhteen.
Joo, tapasin ja onnittelen vielä kohdellisesta tuoreesta uudesta tehtävästä.
Kiitos. Kyllähän tässä ihan voi. Joo, ihan hienosti tekemistä. Riittävän vielä, että ihan vielä ei ole valmista.
Hyvin valmiiksi ja toivon, että voidaan tehdä yhteistyötä näissä sisällöissä. Niin toivon, että sote on kuormittumaan niitä tasa-arvoa
Kyllä.
Hallintoalakin yhteistyötä on tietysti meidän tasa-arvoa.
Ehdottomasti. Kyllä.
Niin, että rajaa toivottavasti tältä osin on keinotekoinen.
Joo, ja mehän ollaan siinä 100 metrin päässä tämmöistä, että se on oikein hyvä. Joo. Mutta ehdottomasti tavataan tuossa vaikka kun ehdittiin. Kyllä vaan, nähdäänkin.
Hello. I think we're about to begin. Honored members of Parliament, international guests, dear friends, happy Pride Week. It is my great privilege to welcome you on behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers to this seminar. My name is Anna Nordgren and I work as a communication advisor for the Nordic Council of Ministers, mainly working with politics and society. I want to take this opportunity to say, first of all, say a few words about where you are. You are at the Nordic Culture Point, which is an official Nordic cultural institution. And I must say that we are thrilled to have you all here. Questions related to equality, inclusion and diversity are things that are very close to our hearts and matters that we work with every day. Our organization administers 4 Nordic funding programs. We run this cultural center and library in the very heart of Helsinki, and we arrange cultural events for all age groups. The different activities create physical, financial and digital space for cultural encounters in the Nordic region and beyond. So please, if you are interested in applying for money for your great cultural project you have, or if you want to take part in any of our cultural events that we arrange, on our website you should find all the information you need. I would also like to thank Amnesty, Trasek and SETA for suggesting a joint seminar on this very important topic. I must say that the legislation in Finland at the moment on transgender is, in my personal opinion, an embarrassment. And I do hope that we could move forward on this topic with a very fast timetable. For instance, the fact that Finland requires trans persons wishing to change their legal gender to get sterilized is something that is totally unacceptable. Why is it still that in 2017 so hard to understand that everybody should have the right to their own bodies and they be recognized for who they are? I am sure that this seminar will give us many thoughts and ideas on how to move forward and learn the do's and don'ts from our closest friends, the other Nordic countries. I wish us all a fruitful day, and I hope we'll meet again on Saturday in the parade. Once more, warmly welcome, välkomna, tervetuloa, and I will now give the floor to the Vice President of Trasek, Kasper Kivistö.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Nordic Culture Point. And I would like to welcome, on behalf of the other organizers, you to this event, and thank you for coming. Thank you for participating. The other organizers are Amnesty International Finnish section, which is the part of Amnesty International being the largest human rights organization in the world. SETA is a national organization for the sexual and gender equality, and Trasek is a national association for trans and intersex rights. This seminar will be streamed live on YouTube, but rest assured, audience will not be filmed, and the link can be found, for example, on our Facebook event. When tweeting about the seminar, please use the hashtag Translaki. If the spelling is unfamiliar for you, you can find it on the walls and on the program. There have been a couple of changes in the program. Arild Myrberg and Olli-Poika Parviainen are unfortunately unable to participate, but Jyrki Kasvi will be replacing Parviainen. The patron of this seminar is the Ministry of Family Affairs and Social Services, Juha Rehula. I will now read his greeting for us. I am pleased that Amnesty International's Finnish office, SETA and Trasek have decided to organize an event where Nordic politicians, representatives of organizations and specialists will discuss our country's legislation on legal gender recognition of transgender people. Our societies have made progress in many matters thanks to the dialogue between the Nordic countries and the open discussion between civil society, specialists and decision makers. I am honored to act as the patron of this event. In Finland, transgender people can validate their changed gender identity through a progress defined by legislation. At one time, our legislation was very progressive. Since then, the interpretations made by bodies supervising the implementation of human rights obligations have developed further. It is now apparent that many countries have progressed faster than us towards a model where legal recognition of gender has been separated from the medical gender reassignment process. The process has been fast and the understanding of gender diversity has increased. I have also reviewed my own opinion after talking with people whose lives are affected by these questions. These encounters have helped me to understand the effect of laws on people's lives. This is a matter of human dignity. In Finland, we need to continue the dialogue on revising the legislation. It would also be useful to get more information on what have been the effects of amendments to law. I hope that our Nordic dialogue and open discussions between civil society, specialists and decision makers show their power once again, and even Finland will be able to revise its legislation on this matter during the coming years. Juha Rehula, Minister of Family Affairs and Social Services. To open the seminar, I would like to welcome Member of Parliament Annika Saarikko, who will be the next Minister of Family Affairs and Social Services after Juha Rehula, starting in July.
Thank you and good afternoon, everybody, respected audience. It is an honor for me to be here today to discuss this important issue. Why? Because this is an important issue for me too. The sexual rights, that's an equal thing for everyone. As I have noticed, Amnesty, SETA and TRASEC, you three together, you are the key players who have seen much effort to bring this disadvantage to public debate and into legislative work. Organizing this event is an important step for the dialogue, and it creates the basis for change. I can only agree with the Minister Juha Rehula's words, so this is kind of double message what we are speaking here. Changed perceptions of gender are reflected in politics, both in international level and little by little also here in Finland. For many citizens, this subject is unfamiliar and difficult. And this is why it is important to bring knowledge and raise active discussion on this. Many parties, including my own Centre Party, have taken a stand to promote this legislative reform. The modern perception of gender emphasizes the equal rights to human rights. We haven't been able to fulfill this, as the international notes have shown. Our society measures itself by accepting diversity, and now it is time to do the measuring. During this reign, the trans law was on the table, as you know, and it was not decided to put forward. I'm not happy about that. This, however, shouldn't mean that it is completely forgotten. Nevertheless, I'm pleased that we took some steps forward by changing the law concerning the marital status of a person. Legislative reform is not affected by many, but for these people, the importance of this is enormous. As stated above, it is about human dignity, but it is also about being accepted, about equality, and about the right to identity. In my point of view, everyone must have the opportunity to build and to live a life that is equivalent to the experience of one's own sex, without discrimination, without bullying. The current state of legislation does not only affect people themselves. it affects whole society, but especially it affects people close to them, their partners, their children, their families, their parents. Adversity and difficulty experienced by a person is reflected inevitably to people close to you. It is difficult to be a good parent, be a good spouse, or a good friend in a situation where you don't feel good about yourself. It is important to build an atmosphere where everyone, from a child to the elderly, knows that life as yourself is possible and secured. That there is a path that supports this journey rather than suppresses it. I really hope, if the day is not today, it is going to be soon, that we can build this path together. I want to hope you joyful Pride days, actually whole Pride week to everyone. And I want to thank you that I have a chance to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. Nordic countries have a lot in common, and we share a lot of what we consider core values, human rights being one of the most important ones. But how these values are interpreted in practice varies greatly. Especially when it comes to legal gender recognition, the countries are very different. We now have an opportunity to learn from the different models that are used in the Nordic countries and how these models came to be. First, I would like to welcome from Sweden, Ulrika Westerlund. Thank you for joining us. In 2016, the Swedish government initiated an inquiry for strengthening life terms and improving life conditions for trans and intersex people. Ulrika Westerlund is the inquiry chair appointed by the Swedish government to lead the investigation. Westerlund has worked extensively with LGBT rights and has been the chairperson of the Swedish Federation for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender and Queer right, is the Secretary of Transgender Europe, and welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Can you hear me? The microphone? Yeah. Okay, I was given 10 minutes to present the situation in Sweden. And I apologize in advance because it's going to be lots of text on these PowerPoints. As you heard, I am now the inquiry chair appointed by the Swedish government to look into the situation for trans people in Sweden. But the topics I'm talking about here is mainly the Legal Gender Recognition Act, which is not as such part of my investigation task. But this is of course affecting the situation for trans people in Sweden. So it's like a mix of topics that are going to come up. I also want to stress before the presentation that Sweden is not good practice. Just to make sure. I was in Finland, I think it was maybe 3 years ago, at another event quite similar to this, also organized by Amnesty, where I also said, observe that Sweden is not good practice. We have some things that are better than Finland, but you can do much better than this, I am sure. So let's see. Recent changes to the legislation in Sweden. Those were done.
Ursäkta, det syns inte hit. Alltså om du kan på något sätt stå åt sidan. Tack så mycket.
It's going to be very challenging for you who sit over here, I notice, but I'll do my best. Maybe I can stand over here. Yes, better. A few changes were made in 2013. The most major one was that the forced sterilizations were removed in July from the law, but actually on the 10th of January due to a court decision. But in the actual law texts, these were the changes that happened in 2013. And as you can see, the law came about in 1972. That's why the language is as it was. So removed was the requirement that a person had to have felt since youth to belong to the so-called other gender, and since a long time act in accordance with that gender. Those are quotes, translation from the Swedish legislation. And also then you had previously to be unmarried Swedish citizen, now changed to permanent resident, and not to be a registered partner. And this is of course a bit quirky, because Sweden had this law about registered partnership between 95 and 2009, and that only applies to partners of the same legal gender. So then if you are in such a registered partnership and one wants to change legal gender, you have to change that partnership into a marriage. It's also enforced, so it's not just for show. Reasons for the changes. This was not done voluntarily by the Swedish politicians. So the Finnish politicians now have a chance to do this in a better way, voluntarily and not by being forced by a court. In the appeal courts. So that went into effect on January 10th of 2013. And the politicians then lagged behind an additional 6 months before they managed to remove it from the actual law. And this had many bad side effects. One of them was that people were actually sterilized after January 10th, 2013. At least one person that we know of, probably more, because the doctors didn't tell that person that she didn't have to. So that happened after it shouldn't have happened any longer. So the reasons, the court decision, the advocacy efforts for many years of a very strong civil society, and national human rights organizations were part of this to make the Swedish politicians as ashamed as possible of the situation. Which I think is something that works in Sweden, and I think it also works in Finland. It doesn't work in all countries, but in some countries it works. So then use that. So this is the current actual wording in the Swedish law, but we translated it into English. So as I said, it's not good practice. So don't copy it, but this is what it says. To change legal gender, you have to, since a long time, have been identified. For a considerable length of time changed into since some time. So it is actually funny. Good that you are laughing. And also that we assume to live like this in the future. So this is the law. And now it becomes even more complicated. I'm really sorry, but it is very complicated. The decision, if you actually then if you fulfill all these requirements, that is decided by the legal advisory board of the National Board of Health and Welfare. So that's a little power or decision-making council. They have then issued their own recommendations that they have sent out to the trans-specific healthcare clinics to help the doctors to advise their applicants or patients when they can send in their applications in order for them to be successful. So they have made their own interpretations of the law, especially the first 3 vague requirements. And that includes then statements like you need an assessment from a medical doctor, psychologist and a sociologist. You need to be observed by the doctor over some time. You have to have a real life experience, and they stress also in all areas of life. So you can't live as a woman in some contexts and then as a man, according to them, in other contexts. Then they will reject your application. They also list what they think is complicating factors. For example, if you have psychiatric illnesses or social problems. And up until extremely recently then, just a few weeks ago, it was also a requirement that you had to have had a consultation with the surgeon before you send in your application. Even if you didn't want any surgery, this was still a requirement. So this confusion of the medical and the legal processes is very ongoing, which is one of the major problems. And the waiting time is also quite long. It can be from 2 months to 18 months, depending on how complicated they think that your application is, basically. So it's also very hard to kind of assess in advance. So Sweden needs to do many things. Of course, separate the legal gender recognition from the medical procedures, which was a suggestion that was in a public investigation that came in 2014, that very explicitly did this separation of the legal and the medical processes. That was a good suggestion. It hasn't been picked up yet in Sweden. Norway took it though, so we're kind of, that's good for Norway, bad for Sweden, but it's a good suggestion. Remove the decision-making power from the legal advisory board, of course, and make sure that the new law is based on self-determination to get your gender identity legally recognized. The age limit should be removed, and also you need to simplify the administration after change of legal gender. We have these gendered person numbers that Nordic countries have. I think that's also a thing we have in common. This creates huge problems, enormous problems that can go on for years. So I've also heard of Swedish people who not changed their legal gender because of all the probable upcoming problems that will come from that. In your life in all sorts of areas. When you talk to your bank, when you try to regain custody of your children, for example, all these things, many problems. Here are also some recommendations for the actual medical treatments. That's something else. But there also the age limit should be removed. And guidelines that exist should be applied equally across the country, which is not the situation right now. More funding is needed, and we also have to look into the situation for asylum-seeking trans people, because Sweden has a law that says that asylum seekers have the right to health care that cannot wait. And this is the wording in the law, that cannot wait. So that's of course also something that is assessed from time to time, exactly what that is. Is it hormones? Is it not hormones? That needs to be decided, because now it's random, if you get it or if you don't. Okay, that's me then. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. Next is Norway. From Norway, I would like to welcome presenter Jeanette Jean Solstad Remø. Remø is a prominent trans rights activist in Norway, a former submarine commander, the leading campaigner in process that led to comprehensive legal reform in Norway. She was the leader of Norwegian Human Rights Alliance and has been the leader and is now a political advisor for Norwegian Association for Transgender People. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I should have some other pictures. Can you help me? Thank you. Yeah, that's better. Less than 1 year ago, I had my gender legally changed from male to female. This was made possible because of recent changes in the Norwegian legislation. I'll give you a short summary by using some glimpse from my own life, which probably will make it a bit more easy to understand why a proper legislation for the transgender population is so important. This seems to be the fundamental question in our societies. Is it a boy or is it a girl? I wouldn't know. It can't talk yet. This boy could not talk either. But since they found a penis between my legs, nobody ever thought that I might be a girl. But at the age of 4, I told my parents, I want to change my name, I want to change my gender. I want to be a girl. This I was denied. So in 1953, ladies and gentlemen, and all others, my fight for recognition kind of started. But I'm so sad to say, with little progress in the following 55 years. I became behind bars because of no acceptance, neither from family nor from society. So I was in my own prison. Fearing to show who I am, my own anxiety has been my greatest challenge. Most transgender, as you know, never leave their prison. For a long time, I was in that invisible group. Even though I had a key, you can see it here, I didn't dare to unlock the door until I was 60 years old. But at last, I just jumped out. Look at that jump. What? To dare is to lose your footstep for a little while. Not to dare is to lose yourself. Søren Kierkegaard. To my surprise, none of my fears came true. Instead, I was embraced and declared courageous by my family, friends, and colleagues. So then I hoped to use my career as a former submarine commander that would help drawing attention to transgender bad living conditions. And, not surprisingly, I found it relatively easy to get the media to bite on. This is how I looked like when I was 27. I think I look younger now. Recent changes in the Norwegian legislation. On January 1st, 2014, the new law providing equality and protection against discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression was implemented in Norway. And I played a small role to get this legislation in place. To get the legal gender recognition, transgender people in most European countries have to accept mental disease, hormonal treatment, castration. I call it castration, some call it irreversible sterilization, but it is castration, and divorce if it's not possible to have same-sex marriage. Do you know of any other minority treated like this in our Western democracies? Well, there still was work to be done. The state decides who I am. Lack of recognition for transgender people. Why should the state want to decide who I am? Why is the state's business to decide that? Well, in fact, that's what states are doing. They are deciding who people are. Amnesty International call this inhuman treatment. You seen this chart before? This map? This trans right map in gender recognition procedure. The red states, that's the bad ones, they require sterilization. You see, Finland, I think Sweden is still red, but there are some blue countries as well. That states who do not require sterilization. And the grey one, they don't have any reliable procedures. And less than 1 year ago, also Norway were among the red ones. So how did Norway turn blue? Well, in March 2014, I applied to the Norwegian Ministry of Health and Care Services to have my legal gender changed from male to female. I justified the application of the Norwegian gender equality and anti-discrimination legislation, as I just told about, and as well as violation of human rights. So what happened? Of course, this was refused, and I was totally, broken. But no, I wasn't. I had the plans ready and complained this rejection to the Equality and Discrimination Ombudsman, which stated that I was being discriminated by the Norwegian government. Yes, that was what I wanted to hear. And then there was Amnesty International, who said, Norway, this is no good. And Amnesty decided to launch an international campaign. I was challenged to front and give this campaign a face. I reflected seriously about this for about 3 seconds, and then I said, yes. The huge organization started to write letters. The Norwegian government was bombarded with letters, cards, emails. This really made a great difference. And I was embraced by Amnesty International. And they had exactly the same agenda as I had. Right to self-determined sex and gender. Remove requirements for sterilization and other medical procedures. I have never been so surprised in my entire life. And 1 year later, also a governmental expert group came to the same conclusion. Right to self-determined sex and gender. In 1 out of 3 cases, Amnesty International achieved positive changes, and this also happened in this case that I was fronting. 1 letter doesn't mean a lot to the world, but when the whole world write letters, that really makes the difference. I and many transgenders owe Amnesty International many hugs and great thanks. And then all my faces went worldwide, and I also got about 10,000 responses, emails, letters, and everything. And the main message was, you are not alone. So I was inspired, and I went even further out in the paper and said, I demand to keep my penis, and I demand to be a woman at the same time. This was of course provoking to some people, but the media liked this kind of behavior, so they were still interested in my struggle, and very helpful. And to make a big jump, this is last year in June. The law was dealt with and voted for in the Parliament, Stortinget. And the pressure towards the government and Parliament to get this legislation in place was enormous. And on the 1st of July 2016, my dream came true. Not only mine, lots of people's dream. The new bill was designed and implemented. And here it is, the short example. Norwegian citizens who experience belonging to the other sex, then they are registered in the population register, are by the law entitled to have a self-determined legal gender recognition. This includes children from the age of 6 with the consent of parents, and self-determined from they are 16 years old. The law also applies to Norwegian citizens residing abroad. And the latest number of how many have used this opportunity last week is 575. Not implementing this law would have been to continue breaking the Norwegian constitution, breaking the Norwegian gender equality and discrimination legislation, breaking the international human rights law, the European Human Rights Convention, and so on. And Amnesty International described the situation for the transgender population as human humiliation and the requirement of castration as torture. I was told, you're not going to make it. Look what happened. Yeah, we made it, we could try. Fantastic. So, what kind of requirements are there for legal gender recognition? In Norway, as described above, there are only age limits now. What still needs to be done? Here are my keywords for Norway. The possibility to choose a third gender. We are working on that now, and it's going to come. To get the intersex DSD population on the political agenda, by now they are invisible. To significantly improve the overall health offer for the transgender population. Improvements in the treatment of healthcare situation for transsexuals, and to get the criminal legislation in accordance with harmonized to the general discrimination legislation. I want to remind you, within all thinking regarding human rights, the freedom of individuals comes first. A well-functioning, democratic, fair, equal society is characterized by the existence of space for tolerance, openness, and by respecting diversity. This is what it all boils down to. We are all different, but we all want to be seen as the one we are. If you oppress other people, if you discriminate someone, the result will be a fight and a battle. This you can see all around you every day. But if you respect other people will respect you. This we also can see around us every day. It's so simple to understand, but it's obviously so hard to fix. My identity, my right. Your identity, your right. Thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for that. Thank you. Next, from Denmark, I would like to welcome presenter Helle Jacobsen. Jacobsen is working as a program manager and a researcher at Amnesty International Danish section. Amnesty International Denmark campaigned vigorously for the human rights-based legislation of legal gender recognition. The new law came in force in September 1st, 2014. And it was at the time one of the most progressive of its kind in Europe. Jacobsen was part of a research team behind recent report by Amnesty International, First Do No Harm, ensuring the rights of children born intersex. So welcome, Helle Jacobsen.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for the invitation and possibility to talk a little bit about the situation in Denmark today. With me on stage, I'm so lucky to have Laura Mygård-Tams, who is a prominent transgender activist from Denmark, who has been campaigning even more than me on this, so we are going to share the presentation a little bit. First, I will just give a brief overview on the situation for legal gender recognition in Denmark. As we heard before, the demand for sterilization and castration as a condition was abolished in 2014. The reasons were many, but I would say that it did not come on a voluntary basis. There was a lot of pressure from trans groups and from the LGBTI society, and Amnesty published the report that we heard from Jeanette John, The State Decides Who I Am, around 6 months before this decision was being made, and that led to a working group from the Ministry of Health and the Ministry for Interior that was giving, among other things, the recommendation to take the demand for sterilization away. Some of the problems that we saw at that time was that there were actually no transgender people represented in this working group, and also no LGBTI organizations. Amnesty was also not there. Looking back, that is probably one of the reasons why it seemed progressive at the time, but when you look at it today, there are quite a lot of problems with the law. So to put it like very shortly, today you have to be 18 years to get a legal gender recognition, and you have to reflect for 6 months after you ask to change your legal gender until it's actually carried out. Then we have the interpretation of the law on children has in some cases meant that the gender assigned at birth is actually still the gender being used if you have children or if you as a trans person already had children. So this is something we have been raising both from our international secretariat in London and from Amnesty Denmark, because this is actually a violation of the right to a private life, and it's also a very biased interpretation of the law, because it's not stated directly in the law, but this is how they interpret the conception of man, woman, and gender. Some of the problems that we have seen, Laura is going to talk a bit more about this, is that it's a very bureaucratic hassle when you actually do change your CPR number. There are a lot of systems that are not geared for this, so it becomes a way of indirectly discriminating transgender people. Oh, going the wrong way here. And then, of course, one of the really big problems is that you have to be 18 years old to legally change your gender. And when you look at international human rights law, this is not consistent regarding to the rights of children. It should, of course, be accessible to children on the basis of their best interest and taking into account their evolving capabilities. So this is one of the areas where the Danish law is really failing. Then we are working with a concept we call medical gender, because it actually looks like the Danish health system has not really accepted that you can legally change your gender. So in some cases, they are still using your assigned gender at birth. Laura will come talk a little bit more about this as well. I'm just going to touch a little bit upon the access to health, just like Ulrika did, because these two areas are so closely tied together. So we have, as Amnesty Denmark, been campaigning for the last couple of years together with trans individuals and trans groups on the access to health. Because when we did the research on the report, The State Decides Who I Am, Denmark was one of the countries of focus, and it really quickly became very clear to us that a lot of the trans individuals in Denmark, they really wanted to talk about access to health instead of the legal gender recognition, because it had such a huge impact on their lives. So we have been working on this, and as you might have heard, the Danish government last year decided to take away the diagnosis, the mental illness diagnosis, as a condition for getting access to healthcare. So this was, well, at the best, it's a symbolic victory, because we haven't seen any impact on the access to health yet. So just to mention this. So the main challenges with the Danish law that I really hope Finland will do better is that there's a complete lack of legal gender recognition for children and adolescents. There's a reflection period of 6 months, and then we really need to look at improved legislation for transgender parents. If you look at the access to health, even though there is no mental diagnosis anymore in Denmark, you still have to go through a lengthy psychiatric screening process in order to access hormones and surgeries. This, we have seen, leads to quite a high number of transgender people self-medicating in Denmark without no possibility to get their hormone levels checked. We also have a complete state monopoly on hormonal treatment at the Clinic of Sexology in Copenhagen and Aalborg. This I could talk about for a very long time, but basically this means that this is the only place you can go if you want hormones or surgeries, and you have to go through a long series of very degrading and humiliating questions and everything from IQ tests to, yeah. Following the campaigning from Amnesty and trans individuals, the National Health Authority has started to make new guidelines or new protocol for access to health. It hasn't so far led to many changes, and there has definitely not been a real involvement of the trans community. So this is something that we will continue to work on. Yeah.
Is this slide with my voice as well? Oh, maybe. Okay, I just yeah. So Linda brought up some of these the current challenges we have already, and yeah, the main problem I would say right now in regards to healthcare is that the change in medical classification from, actually it was not just removed from, being trans was not just removed from the list of mental illnesses, it was moved to another list. So the diagnosis still exists, it's just not considered a mental illness, but it's being used in the exact same way as before. Nothing has changed. We're still waiting to get a new guideline on how to treat transgender people, and it seems like there's not really much willingness to listen to transgender organizations' requests. So there's a main issue in the healthcare authority not recognizing our legal gender, even though we have a legal recognition now in the system. They still list and treat us based on our perceived medical sex, as they call it. Sometimes they call it biological sex. This is really just another way of saying assigned gender, because this is not based on a specific biological situation like hormone levels or look of genitalia or chromosomes. It's all based on an assumption made when the child is born. So don't be fooled by this word biological. Just adding biological in front of your prejudice doesn't make it more scientific. This is a great problem because this is still what the doctors are being taught in medical schools. There's a biological sex, and transgender women are still biologically men, so we should be treated like that, and the other way around, of course. So while the actual gender normalizing therapy that exists and is being applied to the cisgender population without need for this psychological evaluation, transgender people are not equal to cisgender people in this regard, because we are treated as if we are another gender than we actually are. So in that regard, these changes to have legal gender recognition of transgender people in Denmark and being removed from the list of mental illnesses, it's kind of nice on the paper. I mean, it's a nice gesture. It really makes Denmark look like a great country to be trans in. It doesn't really help us that much. It maybe gives us a few more cards that we can play in political discussions to yeah, you promised to treat us right, but you're still not doing it. Please do it. So that's the main obstacle. Of course, then there's also the binary gender system is still we have these social security numbers that are either male or female, which is also a big obstacle for any sort of recognition of non-binary, otherwise non-gendered individuals. So basically, these people still do not just not exist in the system. And I guess we also lack just a general understanding of what is even trans, what is even gender among politicians and bureaucrats. I should probably wrap up now. But I would love to talk a lot more about also this issue of biased interpretation of the law. You can have nice laws, but they don't help much if the people reading the laws are just interpreting them whatever way they want. So some cisgender lesbian women are forced to be written off as the dad of a child because but our system is rigid, we cannot do anything about it. But then there's a transgender man who wants to be written as a dad. No, you can't because you're a woman. You reproduce them the wrong way. Or this idea of biological sex is brought up again and again, and it's it doesn't really make much sense. So it's hard to argue against. So that's the main obstacle I think today is people kind of just don't understand what is even transgender.
So much, Helle and Laura. Thank you. And here to tell us about the situation in Finland, welcome Pia-Bo Oksanen and Terhi Aalto. Oksanen is working as an advisor at Amnesty International Finnish section, and Aaltonen is acting Secretary General at SETA LGBTI Rights in Finland. They are also the great minds behind this seminar.
And so are you.
Good day, everybody. Now we've heard of different legislative solutions in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. And no matter how you look, even I heard you, Ulrika, when you said that don't follow the Swedish pathway. But I think that it's obvious that these are the more progressive legislations. And now we are looking at Finland. So as you can see, we have a birthday. Exactly 15 years ago, President Tarja Halonen signed a new law, Act on Legal Recognition of the Gender of Transsexuals, so-called Trans Act. There are still preconditions for gender recognitions, and they are in the Finnish legislation. I've put here on a nutshell because I knew that at this point we are going to run out of time. But most of you know these by heart, and for those who don't, here are the main points. The person applying for legal gender recognition has to present a medical statement stating that he or she permanently feels to belong to the gender opposite of that assigned to him or her and lives in that gender role. This is an exact translation from the Finlex. So this is the text that states there. Number 2, he or she has been sterilized or is, for some other reasons, infertile and is of age 18. As Member of Parliament Annika Saarikko already mentioned, the single status requirement has been amended. So in 2017, this year, the 1st of March, there is no such requirement anymore. However, partners' consent is still required before registered partnership is converted to be married, to be marriage. Sorry. I have to say that looking at these main, well, I'd say problems in our trans law, Trans Act, there are so many similarities to all of those presentations that you gave before, but I still want to kind of highlight the main problems that we have. Thank you. Because this is what it is in a nutshell. The legal gender recognition process in Finland violates the human rights of trans people in various ways. The process is cruel, inhuman and degrading. Requirements, they force people to choose between the rights, for example, between the right to physical and mental autonomy or to be recognized as whom you are before the law. And this is not something that is like, when you live through this process, you understand how significant this is. And the third one, the process itself enhances and creates violations for example, right to privacy, and it's clearly discriminatory. And when I'm saying that it creates violations, different kinds of violations, I mean, for example, the examples that we have heard here from Laura, example in school, when you have to reveal issues that are completely your private life. This is really, it can end up in a discrimination situation which is really harmful to the youth, to the children and youth mental health, for example. As we are running out of time, I'm not going to continue more about this. I'm going to give Terhi this floor and you can guide us to the future, what we actually want from the legislation to be in the future.
Over to you. Good afternoon, everyone. So great to see you all here. So I will touch a little bit about some recent developments and what is the future of the Trans Act. I would like to mention that there was a working group about legal gender recognition convened by the Ministry of Health and Social Services that recommended in 2015 revision of Trans Act. Revision that we have not seen yet. The recommendations of the working group included abolishing requirements for infertility and unmarried status as preconditions for legal gender recognition. As we have already heard today, the unmarried status is no longer relevant because of the recent renewal of the Marriage Act. The working group also recommended examining on whether the legislation can be revised so that it would enable legal recognition without having to present a medical statement on gender identity. The working group also recommended assessing the majority of age as a precondition for legal gender recognition. However, the actions have not been taken to revise the law or to make those changes and further assessments. We already touched upon few international recommendations and calling of action by the international human rights mechanisms. But I would like to highlight two very recent developments on that. Finland went through the session of the Universal Periodic Review about 2 months ago and received from 8 UN member states recommendations to review the Trans Act. Some of them, all of them were related to the removing requirement of sterilization, but some of them also requested considering much wider revision of the trans law so that it would be human rights based and take into consideration the self-determination. Also, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in April this month, if I recall correctly, that the sterilization requirement in legal gender recognition violates human rights. This sets a precedent for the European countries, and we will see what Finland does in relation to that one. Well, this being the situation, the revision of the Trans Act is still not in the plans of the current government. Well, it was also excluded from the recently published second National Action Plan on Fundamental and Human Rights for 2017-2019. Yeah. Okay. So, what about the future? We need the urgent revision of the Trans Act, and the key issues on what should be done would be to have a rights-based Trans Act that is based on self-determination. The legal gender recognition and medical processes should be separated from each other, and legal gender recognition should be based on person's own decision. Very much in line with what we have heard today as the situation in Norway and the need in the other countries. Of course, this means that the trans-specific healthcare should be provided. It's just the issue that the processes should be separated and based on the needs of the individual. The sterilization requirement and any other compulsory medical treatment should be abolished from the Trans Act. Also, the requirements of medical or mental health diagnosis as prerequisite for the legal gender recognition should be removed. There's a need to make legal gender recognition available irrespective of age. Currently, it is not available for minors under any circumstances, and that's very worrying, taking into consideration that the best interest of the child should always prevail, and evolving capacities of the child should be taken into consideration. What should be done is to develop a procedure that is quick, transparent, and based on self-determination. And another issue that has been mentioned by many of the presenters today is to look into the needs of people of non-binary gender and how they could be taken into consideration, and whether there should be for example, an inclusion of blank or other option on the identity documents for those who seek it. Well, great progress has been done in many Nordic countries and elsewhere in Europe and outside of the region. And there is a lot for Finland to learn from those experiences, to learn from what has been done, and also to learn from what we are hearing today from other countries what still needs to be done. So we shouldn't just follow the suit, but we should aim to get the best transact for Finland. And to demonstrate that we are really standing for the human rights for all the individuals, and remove the discriminatory transact that violates the basic human rights of a group of people in our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pia Puoksanen and Terhi Aaltonen. At this moment, I would like to ask if there is someone who definitely do not want to be seen on any camera. So please maybe raise your hand if you can, and we will not be really filming the audience, but the backs of some people's head might in some pictures be seen. So if that's a problem, you can also tell Pia Puoksanen about it later.
It's the national broadcasting company that who wants to document this, so we are happy for you to be here. Thank you. But if somebody doesn't want to be in the pictures, please let us know.
So, and unfortunately, due to long distance and schedules, we were unable to include Iceland, Faroe Island, and Same representation. But rest assured, they're not forgotten, and they are listening via YouTube live broadcast. So I would now like to welcome on stage the representatives of the community itself that this matter concerns. Vanda Eriksson is a non-binary trans activist and the president of TRASEC. They have a background in both natural sciences and cultural management, but currently they are finishing up their master's thesis in gender studies, where they focus on trans studies, critical gender theory, and trans history. Vanda also works with research related to HIV positivity in Finland, as well as produces products. Their personal pronoun is they. Welcome, Vanda. Sakris Kupila is a 21-year-old medical student from Finland. Sakris has been an active member in many different non-governmental organizations, such as SETA and Väestöliitto. Sakris is now the face of Amnesty International's global campaign, just like Jeanette was a couple of years ago in Norway. The campaign call all over the world is to have the Finnish government make the process for legal gender recognition quick, accessible, and respectful of human rights. Sakris Kupila has refused to be sterilized as he sees that this requirement, amongst others, is a violation of human rights. So please welcome Sakris Kupila. Also, I would like to ask Jeanette Jean Solstad-Remö to return on the stage. Do you have the microphone?
Yes.
Thank you. So, in your own words, if you could describe us what it means to you personally to have your gender legally recognized. Who wants to go first?
I can't really answer that question because I can't get my gender recognized legally. So, pass. No, I'm just kidding. As Kasper said, I'm non-binary, which means I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, and I'm also uncomfortable with the idea of this random third sex that features all the misfits like me, and what I feel is an important part of this campaigning outside of the actual Trans Act would definitely be to think about what a legal gender is, what do we do with it, how does it work, where can it be seen, where is it used. And currently Trasek and SETA are featuring the Translaki campaign, the Trans Act campaign, and we've been doing these discussion nights in Turku and in Helsinki, and we have invited a bunch of non-binary people and people from example or from the transvestite community, and the idea has been to hear out people who do not benefit from the normal, so to speak, normative binary gender. So we have had reports that people, agender people want, for example, passports with no gender on them. We have had reports where non-binary people might have wanted a third or a fourth or a fifth or 100th gender, and we've even had reports of members of the transvestite community wanting 2 legal genders depending on their presentation. So it's kind of a mess right now, and we don't really have a set statement for what it is we're doing and what we want to be doing. I don't think basically saying third sex only is the answer, because it would leave things halfway in many ways, but for me it would mean a lot to be able to travel with a passport that doesn't get me caught in security every bloody time.
I'd also love to see that third or possible, well, number X option on the passport, but right now it's possibly not happening. For me, gender is, especially legal gender, is more of a formality that I face every time I, well, go to the doctor or travel or apply for anything. And for me right now personally, if I could change my legal gender, I would be safer and more protected, because right now my presentation really does not reflect the legal gender of mine, which leads to not so funny situations and discrimination at borders, at the doctor's appointments, everywhere where it's brought up. And every single time I have to explain myself. And that would be really nice if I just could live my own life without being picked on every single time. And also, it would be nice to be legally recognized as myself. I'm kind of lucky because it's not affecting my life that much, so I actually can stay legally what's assigned to me at birth while campaigning for this change. But maybe someday I'll get my legal gender changed.
Yeah, you already know a little bit about my story, and there is a before story and there is a now story. So what was my situation before the 1st of July 2016 is more or less what was described here right now. My ID documents didn't cooperate with my, well, was looking with my gender expression, and my gender identity was not recognized as the one I am, and it was a hard time, and because you don't really know how often you have to show your documents. Almost every day, if you go to the post office to pick up a parcel, if you go to the pharmacy to get some medicine, if you go on traveling, if you're stopped in police control or something, all over you have to show your identity in this society you are living nowadays. And once I even was accused for showing false identity. And it was terrible, because I had to explain who I was so many times, and it was very humiliating. So I'm glad I'm off on the other side of 2016, because then my life suddenly became much easier, because now everybody believes who I am if I present my ID documents. No problems anymore, not by traveling, not whatsoever, and I even got better health. it's a fact that I was a bit allergic before, not a bit, sometimes very, very, very badly also. I don't have it anymore. Maybe it's a coincidence, but I don't think so. I think it's I have got a better life. So this is a win-win situation also for the health of the in the country. Less money to spend on the health department, you know. So and it's a win-win situation because also for the people who is struggling with gender identity, then they have better health and they will comply better in the society in all ways. That's at least how I'm feeling it. Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about healthcare because that's something I just have to accept. If I could change my legal gender, I would get full insurance covering my hormone treatment that I use continuously. And right now it costs me like €500,000 extra a year because my legal gender is wrong. Yes.
I can add that I had the same, but I sued Kela and I won.
I have to say, all of this resonates with me very greatly because just a couple months ago I was still legally considered female, so you can imagine what it feels like for me to go, for example, be stopped at by the police in the middle of the night driving a car and showing an identity card of a female, so that leads to some interesting situations, but more about those some other time. So, Panda and Sakris, how do you feel about the current process for legal gender recognition in Finland?
The current process, I feel, is going forward very slowly to some extent, but also very steadily. As we all know, we have a very right-wing government right now, and they have. We also know that the processing of the Trans Act started in 2013, and then something happened, and by something I mean elections happened. And now we're in a situation where things are not progressing, and it's very frustrating, of course, because we see people in big parties campaigning during Pride and talking about how they might join Pride marches and so forth, and we know that these are the same people that keep people like me hostage. So it's very frustrating, but I have great faith in what we do right now. The Trans Act campaign has been incredible, and I'm so grateful to all the brilliant activists at SETA and Prasek for working on it, because we did this, we called it the gender tempurata. It was this simulation. It was a obstacle course that simulated the trans process or the treatment process in Finland, or not even a treatment, but the up to diagnosis. And people had to like role play and go meet a doctor and go meet a I don't know, really transphobic PE teacher and so forth. It was great. And people went in all like, haha, blah, whatever, and then they come out crying, and they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. And it was, for me, it was like, oh yeah, this is so simple, this is so everyday, like this is what I work with. And then, you know, you have people who have no idea, and they just come out and they're so impressed, and they're like, oh my goodness, like this is so wrong. So I think the work we're doing right now is very much about raising awareness, and I think it's really making a difference, and I am really excited to see where this leads. And I really think something's going to happen soon. It has to, right?
I agree with the fact that something has to happen, and it's already happening, and I see us all the people working on this issue, talking about the Trans Act and so on, to actually contribute to the big change that is happening. There was a time when I was almost cynical about nothing's ever going to change, because I grew up with this law. I grew up listening to all the politicians kind of dismissing this law or changing the law over and over again. And right now I'm an adult and the law is still the same. And the anger with the old or the present law was one of the reasons why I ever got into activism. I could also talk about the medical process for long times, but since I'm studying medicine, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm talking about legislation strictly.
But you could explain a little bit about how the diagnosis is.
Yes, thank you for guiding me. Yes. So you have to go to a doctor that's referring to a psychiatrist in either Helsinki or Tampere in the gender clinics. That's the first obstacle many people see, because quite often the doctor you go to refuses to write that referral. That's my Swedish coming through. The referral letter to the psychiatrist, and I had to actually show Finlex our legislation from my iPad so that the doctor I went to actually made that referral. And then you wait to get your first appointment to that clinic. Then you go through a diagnosing process. It can take from half a year to year and a half. I don't know. Mine went really quickly in 5 months. But you meet a psychiatric nurse, at least I did, for like 5 times. Then you meet a psychologist, some 2 times, a psychiatrist maybe 2 times. You might also meet a social worker. You might go there with your parents or family, and after that you get your diagnosis. And after that you can change your name. I tried to before my diagnosis, but that was impossible. I actually really fought with our magistration, but they refused. After that you might get on hormones. It takes often at least 3 months after you get your diagnosis. After that it takes 1 year for you to get the first psychiatrist to actually give the second opinion that yes, my diagnosis was right, this person is trans. Then you have to wait and go and meet the second psychiatrist in the other city to get another second opinion. And then you have to get the sterilization, letter from your endocrinologist or something. And then you can go to the government to change the gender, and that's really, really complicated. I'm right in the middle of the process of getting all those letters, just for future reference. I'm not doing anything with them. I just want them. I just want them and then frame them and then show them to people 20 years from now. But also from the medical point of view, I can talk a little bit. Doctors are not taught anything about this matter in this 6 years medical school. We are going through nothing. It's really transphobic, the whole atmosphere and environment, and that was one reason why I actually took a year off last year, because it was horrible to be there as a trans person, be discriminated against as a trans person and as a member of a minority. And also there's no reason for the legal and medical process to be tied together. There's no reason. Even the whole global association of doctor organizations have refused to actually comply to these things. And there are a lot of doctor associations globally that have refused to perform sterilization for trans acts. But Finland seems not to be a part of these countries that the doctors have said that we are not going to sterilize anyone, because it's still in action here. Yes.
Yeah, but that is always almost also the same in Norway now, because of the transsexuals. If you like to have a full gender medical recognition, then you have to go about through the same process as you have here. So that's not much the same. But you can, in Norway, do it by yourself. That's the difference. That's a great difference. So you can have a copy. I can send it to you. A copy of our legislation, but you have to translate it into Finnish, I suppose. But it is there. It's free to take it. I hope you do, because it's a great legislation, and it has helped lots of people. Even though those who want to take a full medical transition as well, because they can start by themselves and start living in the sex or gender that you prefer. So that would be fine if you could copy what we have done in Norway. I think that will help quite many people also in Finland. Thank you.
So now that you actually have the microphone, first of all, if you have questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand, and if I don't see you, maybe someone will get you a microphone. I'm sorry if I don't see everyone. And Jeanette, you have lived through this change, so could you tell us a little bit about the social status? Has it changed the everyday lives, or how the society sees trans individuals in Norway?
Yeah, at least they get to use me, to know me, they get used to me. My neighbors, my family, my colleagues, everybody, okay, it's no problem really, because they more or less experience that I'm the same person that I was before, but maybe I'm a little bit more easy to get together with, more social, yeah, better humor, and yeah, my life is better in all ways. So I can go wherever I like in Oslo. I don't go out at night, late at night, downtown, and meeting drunk people and things like that. But all day through, go to restaurants and all over, and have no problems. So I think the climate has changed a bit after this new legislation was in place as well, because now people are aware of it and they know about it. So they don't get that much astonished when they find out that I'm not a woman, which I actually is, but that if they see me as a man, that won't surprise them very much anymore.
Okay.
There's a question.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Christer from Chair of Rainbow Families Finland, also the board of SETA. We've been talking about how the legal process and the medical process must be separated. That's good and fine. But what about the medical process? Shouldn't that also be made more easy and more respectful of the person? What's the case in Norway? You mentioned it shortly.
Yeah, the case in Norway is that you have to go to the Rikshospitalet. It's the main hospital in Oslo in Norway, and that's the only place you can have a full sex change operation done. You have to go take this diagnosis, mentally ill, F64 it's called, and you have to take those hormones, and you have to be castrated and accept this. And it takes an awful long time for many people. And some people are rejected, which is not good at all. And some people, they go abroad, do it by themselves, because with the money and the results are maybe not always as secure as it could be if it was done in Norway. So that side of it is still a problem also in Norway. But we are working on it, and we hope that more doctors can be able to help those people in first way. Yeah.
A quick comment on this. The reason why we, or at least I kind of speak for the medical process, is because that's not tied to legislation that much. It's autonomous, it's tied to the diagnostic manual, which is changing this year or maybe next year to ICD 11, which only has one diagnosis for trans people, which is okay, because now it's divided into 3-4 different diagnoses, and only with one of them you get all the changes you need in the process. It's going to take a lot of time, it's really rigid, but it has gotten better when there have been more tolerating people in the healthcare system, but it's still not at all good, but it's maybe getting better slowly.
I think one of the main problems is that we don't have what we call god praxis or käypähoito. We don't have a set standard of care for how to treat a trans person. So we have the Trans Act, and then we have the Trans Decree, which is a treatment decree stating that you should do this and this, blah, blah, blah. These are the steps you go through. but they don't actually say like, okay, so you go through this many months of or these kind of tests or whatever. So that means essentially, seeing as we have a gatekeeper system where we have two main psychiatrists in Finland who basically are in charge of the entire system, are actually free to dictate how these treatments or how these diagnostic criterion, how they're actually investigated. Obviously, you still have to fill the same diagnostic criteria as everyone else, but how you get to find these is a separate case. And what they, for example, what they have nowadays is they still use the Minnesota multiphasic inventory, blah blah something, which is the personality test from 1954 or something. And I'm Swedish speaking by native tongue, and I come there and they're like, and then they ask, hey, no miten sun sukupuolielämä? That's literally, how is your gender life? But what they mean is, what is your sex life like? And then I'm like, my gender life is fine, I guess. Like, and like all these like very old questions that are all like super heteronormative. I don't live in a monogamous relationship. My partner is, well, I didn't ask her for her gender. I think she's a girl, maybe. I don't know. She uses female pronouns, and things like this. And how do you explain this to someone who sits there and it's like, how's your gender life? So like I think we need good praxis. I think we need a set of guidelines so that you actually get fair treatment and equal treatment, no matter which clinic you're in, what language you speak, and so forth and so forth. And this has been very problematic for me. It's like I feel like they're just freewheeling. Like I can look at ink blots all night long if I like what. I just think there needs to be a set of actually like proper guidelines for how you treat people.
Yes, and there are actually no real surveillance on how it's done and what the outcomes are, and that's a huge problem too.
Any more questions? You can be courageous. You can ask.
Okay, there. I can take.
You can ask anything. We
I
will
have
answer.
a purpose in life.
Yes.
I bring you to mine. There you go.
Hey, I'm not really from human rights community, but I'm just interested, like, how did this sterilization ended up there? Because it looks like even from the point of common sense, why do you need it at all? So maybe I don't understand something.
The reason in Finland is that the Trans Act that came in 2002 actually replaced the Castration Act from 1970. That's how long it was between any legislation on this. So it's a historic remnant, essentially. It has no point.
Yeah, and I am under the assumption that it was actually a requirement. They wouldn't have, accepted the new law if the sterilization wouldn't have been there. So it had to be there in order for even this law to get through. It was a really big issue or a political question. Yeah, that's why. But there's no reason, no actual reason.
My name is Veronika Pimenov. I'm a psychiatrist and a gatekeeper, former gatekeeper. I wanted to answer this question about infertility because it does not say sterilization in the current Finnish law. And therefore there are no other compulsory treatments. The real issue why it's there is that all the laws until then in Europe had it, and also we were fighting at that time not to have it, but there was a Council of Europe colloquy, Transsexualist Medicine and Law in Amsterdam 1993, and there were put not really guidelines, but it was, I was the only one who said no, but I was a single female voice from provincial Finland, so it was not there. It's the guidelines ought to be, what should there be the conditions for legal recognition. And there were several ones, 8. For instance, dissolution of marriage, which we didn't put into the law in Finland. and there was irreversible sterility. Proof of irreversible sterility is a condition sine qua non, which was the only condition sine qua non at that time. This is history, yes. And what's the... we know, for instance, how it was then in Germany, where they had it too. The Constitutional Court took it away, saying that they can understand that people are used to that women are giving birth and men are procreating, but if individuals, the rights of the individuals to have it in another way are more valid than this. This was some years ago, and the Constitutional Court in that country then put away, completely abolished the trans law, which was from 1980. But this is really has been the historical reason.
Yeah.
For
I can say I see that you are really prepared for this. What I wanted to say is that it says infertility, and that is not the same thing as forced sterilization. Maybe it cannot be 100% interchangeable, but it leaves out, for example, me. I am on hormones. I am not infertile. I will not be infertile due to this hormone treatment. I just will not, and that would require me to go through a sterilization process through surgery, and that would be irreversible. And this same situation, there are a lot of people living through the same things, and that is completely unacceptable. I hear these arguments about, well, but you will be infertile anyway, why are you whining about this little thing? Well, because that's not reality, and I do not consent to this surgical treatment. So we cannot just start arguing over which word to use. We must actually look at the reality and listen to the people.
I was asked to tell something about, and that was the question, where does it come from? And I think I gave that answer. Where
Yes.
does it come from? And I let me say just one thing. Then you will certainly know that a sterilization operation is not required in Finland, and most go by a certificate on home treatment. Perhaps not everybody. Let's say that this thing is unacceptable, and as I can tell you that I have been writing to both for years, before all these campaigns, since 2008, to the ministry saying that we can't have such a law which picks out one minority and says these people have to be infertile. That cannot be in any state with rule of law. And it is not acceptable that for having another right to choose your gender, that you have to lose that there is a condition to lose other rights. I think we agree completely on this matter, or perhaps you don't agree, but it is unacceptable, and it has to go out there. It was only the question was why it has become there.
Yes, I appreciate you and I respect you as a person and as a professional and as a colleague. I just wanted to make that point. And yes, you can actually get this letter of infertility from your hormone doctor, but in order to get that, I must either lie and get caught because I'm not fertile, and they might actually check that via ultrasound. But the main reason and the base reason for this requirement is purely human. I won't say stupidity, dumbness,
Bigotry?
Bigotry, yes. That's the main reason. Not any medical reasons, but humans and people.
Please.
Okay, I just wanted to keep bashing Sweden a little bit more so well earlier, because the Finnish legislation bears a striking resemblance to the Swedish one, you have to say, so I think it might be that the Finnish legislators maybe were a bit inspired by the Swedish legislation that was 30 years older than the Finnish one when it came into effect. And in Sweden, the Swedish sterilization requirement, it's a strong linkage to other forced sterilizations that have been happening in Sweden. Sweden has a very bad history of this, of forcibly sterilizing other groups of the population, mostly women, Roma women, women that the society will approve of their lifestyles, etc. So in Sweden, the explanation is very simple. It's because we were a country at that time, in the beginning of the 70s, that felt that we could sterilize people forcibly against their will. So, and for trans people, it continued then for a much longer time than the other groups, because that law was stopped in 1975, but that was after the introduction of the Legal Gender Recognition Act in Sweden. So it's obvious in Sweden where it comes from. And there might be some history here also, the linkage between the countries.
I wanna start by saying thank you. I love your minaparikas, and I've used your dissertation very much in my master's thesis, and Women of this is very known for having developed the treatment system immensely. Regarding the whole sterilization issue, this is something that I get a lot at my Trasek email, because there are people who are arguably maybe justified in their anger, saying that, hey, I don't sterilize people, I don't force people toward a wall with a gun and then I sterilize them, and obviously that's not what we mean when we say forced sterilization. I personally kind of just thought it was funny to get one of those papers myself, so I went to my endocrinologist and I was like, haha, I'm not fertile, and then she was like, ah, yeah, right, no, and she gave me a paper, and I'm like, see, this is literally it. It was literally a question of hormone usage. So it's not necessarily, obviously, a violent process in the way we think of violence, but the problem is that, for one, all trans people don't want hormone treatment. All trans people can't use hormone treatment even if they wanted to. And there are so many reasons that we can't really know about, and when those people want to have their gender legally recognized, it means they need to go through surgical sterilization. And we in Trasek and our board actually have reports from the 2000s and the late side of 2010s that people have in Finland been sterilized, so to speak, against their will, so that these have been hidden in statistics in the Väestörekisteri among people who have voluntarily gotten sterilized over 30 years of age. So people have been forcefully sterilized, and these statistics have been hidden in the register of whatever citizens, I don't know how you translate that. This is Finland in 2010, and this is why I'm so friggin' upset whenever someone says that, I'm not trying to forcefully sterilize anyone, because this is what's happening. And we also know from Amnesty's reports that there have been people telling the interviewers that they have been using hormonal treatment because they have felt coerced by medical staff because they needed to get their passport fixed. And they have regretted this later. They don't regret as in they don't regret being trans or transitioning, but they did not want to be on hormone treatment. And they have felt coerced into doing this because the only other option would have been surgery, and that would have been even more dramatic. So this is a real issue. This is not a question of some people just being on hormones and not caring. For someone like me, it's not a big issue. For someone like me, the question of forced sterilization or the demand for infertility, it's not a big deal. I don't give a friggin' if it's in the law or not. But I don't represent every trans person, and just because it's not important for me, it doesn't mean it's not a huge question of life and death for others, because it might be a question of family, and it might be a question of life and death.
I don't know if this has been discussed in Finland, or if it is a problem, but in Norway, these social security numbers, dividing people either as man or woman, we will lose them. We will not have enough numbers. Quite a few years from now, maybe in 25 to 27, and then we have to implement a new system. And this system will be non-gender, I-gender, or bi-gender, whatever. So that is the future. Maybe it will be a little bit better for some people then.
So, as a tiny personal remark, I could not forgive myself for going through that sterilization surgery. I just could not forgive myself, and that's why I'm not even considering. There's questions. I'm not trying to be
I will have one more question now, and then we will ask the politicians to join us, and we will have more questions after that. But please.
My question is not about sterilization, so if somebody would like to continue on that one. Okay, this is more like a comment, because there is a lot of discussion about sterilization and the power that psychiatrists have. But then again, not all get even with the right diagnosed, not all get the treatments they want. So there are doctors after psychiatrists who also have power to deny the treatment, whether it is the sterilization or other kind of surgery, and they do. So not everybody gets the treatments they need to have a good life, and that should be not forgotten in this discussion about medical practices. Thanks.
Just a moment with the rest of the questions. I will quickly introduce our political representatives, because they do have a lot of power and saying in this, so I think they should be here also. So I would like to welcome Silvia Modig from Left Alliance. Eva Pyret from the Swedish Liberal Party. Both being members of the Nordic Council. Anton Rönholm from the Social Democratic Party. And Jyrki Kasvi from the Green Party. And Sari Raasina from the National Coalition Party. Thank you all for joining us, and I have to tell the audience that we did also invite Christian Democrats and the True Finns, but both declined our invitation, so are not represented here. Well, the new Blue Future, yes, that Finns know about. First, I would also like everyone to state their pronouns so we don't get them wrong. So if everyone could say which pronouns they prefer, and to especially the Nordic guests of us and also the audience, if you have questions or comments, do raise your hand, and we are trying to spot you all, but be part of the conversation definitely. And same for the panelists. If you have questions for our Nordic guests, this is a perfect opportunity to have a dialogue also. So we have the microphone there. So
There are 2 microphones.
okay.
Yes.
So go ahead and introduce yourself and the pronouns that you prefer to use.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and I want to apologize in the beginning that because I am heterosexual, cis woman, and my English is quite limited, so I probably will make some mistakes of certain terms, and I do ask your forgiveness there. I don't want to offend anybody by saying something in incorrect way, but I am she. So you can call me by that pronoun easily, and I think that it is really important that we keep on having this conversation in our parliament, even though the legislation hasn't been changed. I think that it's important that we keep on pushing it through, and it will pass. Probably not with this government, but there will be a day that it will be passed.
Hello, I'm Jyrki Kasvi, and I second everything my colleague here said about probably getting some of the terms wrong, and I apologize for that in advance. And it's so funny that in Finnish you don't have to think about he or she, and now probably he is the right word for me. but I'm looking forward to a future where you shouldn't have to think about words like that, because who cares?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation for the organizers. So my name is Anton. My social security number ends with an uneven number that legally defines me as a man, and this is how I feel myself as well. I've been working quite closely also starting in the previous government when Susanna Huovinen as the minister for social affairs started up the process of changing the law, and we could not finish it at that time, and this government doesn't seem to be doing it either, but I'm proud to represent a party that we have this stance now for the beginning of 2010 that the party congress said that at least the legislative change that Sylvia has now initiated should come into force, and I've learned quite a lot today, so it's been very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi to everybody. I'm Sylvia from the Left Alliance, and I determine myself as a middle-aged woman. Actually, I feel like a teenager, but when I look in the mirror, now it's a middle-aged woman who is looking back. I think this discussion today is really important, that it's more than just about changing the trans law, which has to be changed because it's a human right violation at this point. But it's about, in more general, I'm thinking these days much more about how much we divide and define in society by gender. For example, trying to make an initiative in the city council that we could change the bathrooms so that they wouldn't have genders on the doors ends up in a huge argument. And this is why it's so important to have this discussion, and that's why it's so important that we try in the parliament to get into the plenary session these discussions, because it will change the law. It's a matter of time, but we need the discussions to make it happen a little bit faster. And that's why I'm so sad that the Christian Democrats and I don't call them the true Finns, they're Finns, or the blue future or dark past or whatever. But I'm so sorry that they are not here, because we all agree, we understand this importance of this issue, and they are the ones that I would hope that would see example, hear from people who it affects, because for most of us the trans law doesn't have any, it doesn't affect my everyday life at all, but I know for some people it's a question of life and death, and it's a question about human rights. And when you think about human rights, you cannot look at it from the point of view, how does it affect me? Human rights are one package, and if one person's human rights are being pushed down, then your human rights are being pushed down.
Yeah. I can inform you, applause. I can inform you that Oslo, for a short time ago, the government, they decided that Oslo should be a trans and LGBT friendly capital, and that implies building unisex toilets, for example, or things like that, and make it more easy to be a trans person in Oslo. Very good. And also other big towns, I have to say, in Norway, also following up with this. So it looks better and better every day. And my pronouns is, I think, she and her. Thanks.
As it was probably mentioned, I use he in gendered languages, like English.
Hi, my name is Panda and I use they.
My name is Eva. I'm a cis woman, and I like to be called or pronounced she. I think it's really difficult sometimes when we, because I do agree that gender sometimes is completely something that we should not think about so much, but there are also occasions where we need to think about gender, and we need to make us aware about how different genders are treated and discriminated upon. So I think we need to think that we are allowed to show how women are being treated, or people who don't feel that they fit in the binary gender sort of division are being treated. So at the same time as it shouldn't be so important, it is also important. It's a very difficult thing sometimes to explain. And I agree with all. I think it's actually sometimes the practical issues, I mean, like the unisex toilet, isn't such a big issue. I mean, in our parliament, in my office corridor, we actually have one, and it wasn't. And I think we didn't understand that it was such a big deal before the yellow papers wrote about it.
I have one at home.
Exactly, you have one at home. Yes, us too, actually. Yeah. But of course, I think in the public space, it is important to feel everybody can go where they feel they are safe and feel safe. I was trying to remember when Veronika Pimenovs, I think, talked about 2002. I was Minister of Health and Social Services and actually Gender Equality in 99, 2000, and 2002, 2003, and we actually tried to advance the legislation on a Trans Act or whatever it was called already then, but I didn't remember it so well as you did, which of course is a bad thing. I do think it is, I do apologize, I wasn't here, and my colleagues that we weren't here to listen to you, because I think that would have been actually the really important thing, not so much that we are speaking, but that we are actually trying to listen and to learn more, because we need to be sort of the catalyzers for perhaps the true things or others. We need to talk to them in different arenas, to those who are not so open for change and to listen to what this is all about. So I hope that we will get a law very soon. I also think it will happen, but I'm not so optimistic about the time span. I will do my part to have it though.
And you mentioned that some of you did not actually get to hear the presentations of the other Nordic countries, so perhaps the ones that were here to listen to it could tell what thoughts did it evoke in you, what is the best possible result, and how you would want the law to look like, and what are the downsides of the different legislations that we want to avoid. A small question, isn't it?
You can start there. No, you can go there.
Shall I do my speak again? Now, I guess you know that in Norway you have self-determined possibilities to change your gender. You just do it by sending fill it out on a sheet and send it to the tax company, and then they have to accept it. You decide yourself, and it's above 16 years, and it's between 6 years and 16. Then you have to have the parents has to agree. But you're free to do it anytime, and you just say that you belong to the opposite gender. You have to write that on this sheet. That's all we have to do, and it's working quite fine. Many people thought this would be the end of the world, but it's not really. It's quite good. Exactly, especially for me and 575 other people who started now.
Can I ask, are there anything that is problematic in the Norwegian system? Because we all have the example.
In this,
if I may,
in this legislation, I have not heard about any problems. Because if you change your gender, you are a woman, you change your gender, you become a father. Yeah, and also the other way around. That's the main task.
I think a big part of what might be problematic here is the fact that there is such a thing as opposite gender. It does not allow room for non-binary identities. And I think for us, what we're trying to do right now in the Translaki campaign is we need to separate that from the whole question of what legal gender is in general. So we have the treatment process and the diagnostic criterion and how to do it in practice, but then we also have the question do we actually need to have a legal gender? So as I said, we had these discussion nights with the Trans Act campaign, and non-binary people got to say what they were actually thinking about it, and what we got. Most of us agreed on the fact that we need some form of gender because we need it for equality work, for example. We needed to make sure that women are not being pushed down and discriminated against. But what we all thought was that we also do not want a passport that says, like, blah blah gender something. We actually would like something that is maybe hidden, so maybe you could just have this like statistic gender rather than something that's actually on all of your papers and all of your sort of IDs and everything. And then maybe the statistic gender could be something that you could just determine yourself. Like it can be something when you're born and you're assigned a gender, that's okay, I guess, in comparison. But then, you know, when you're older and if you want to change it yourself, then you can just hand in a slip to the magistrate and be like, that would be self-determination.
Yeah, that would be the next step also in Norway, and it's already on the political agenda. So far they call it for the third gender, but the name will be at last, I don't know. But so far it's called third gender, and I guess it will be now there is election in Norway this autumn, and I guess we'll hear more about it. So yes, it will come, but we had to do it, take it step by step. Yeah.
Do you have any concerns, like the worst case scenario that we want to avoid, especially in Finland?
The worst case scenario for me is that nothing happens, and the next worst case scenario is that we celebrate the fact that we remove the infertility part, and then we're like, okay, we're done, let's wait another 14 years. Because, yes, I said, I know that's important for a lot of people, but for me, one of the most important would be to help and support trans kids. We have data that says over 50% of trans kids either have self-destructive thoughts or even attempt suicide. So this, if ever, is the place to say, please won't somebody think of the children.
I think I agree with the worst case scenarios you talked about. I was the one who made the initiative about changing the law on the fertility issue, and I was thinking about it a lot. I was talking to a lot of people from the trans community, and everybody didn't agree with me. Some people thought that it's not a good way to go because the fear is that we lose the most, how do I say this in English? But it's such an obvious human rights violation. That then we lose some force in our how we try to. Because we need the whole law to change. And people were afraid that if we do this, then people are going to be satisfied and nothing else changes. But I came to the conclusion that I think it is a better way to go this way. Even if the attitudes are changing, more and more of the parties are now understanding that the trans law has to be changed in a whole. I don't trust this government to do it. The last term, my party was in the government, and we weren't able to do it. So we have to take the steps we can. And I think there's a value in itself that if we get this initiative into the plenary session and have the discussion, and we can ask these other people, like, do you really think it's right and according to human rights that we sterilize one group of people? Nobody can argue against it. You say, yeah, it's quite all right with me. Nobody can do that. And then we will get the discussion going, because if you think about equal marriage law, which we now have, it's a long process. It was in the beginning of the 90s when the first initiatives were made for being able to register your partnership. So it took us, it took us 25 years to get there. And the problem is that trans people are still, in many ways, invisible. Like in the parliament now, I think one reason why the discussions became more respectful towards each other, the words were chosen more wisely, was because there were so many of us sitting there who are openly gay. Even if I hate the word, I have never heard somebody say, I'm openly heterosexual. I can't stand the word, but there were so many of us that you couldn't talk like we weren't in the room. You had to talk about us and to us. And this is, I think, the problem. The trans people are, in a way, invisible still in our system and in the parliament, at least. And that's why it's possible to speak like they don't exist. And that's why I think it's important that we get it into the plenary session.
The next one is Eva.
Okay, just one comment there. The trans people are invisible. all over. So you have to take it into the education system.
You can bring me into plenary anytime.
Thank you, thank you. I do agree that I think we also need to look at how the children, how to help the children, because of course, I mean, it's not only helping those who are trans children, it also helps the others to build their world in a more sort of a way where everybody can be themselves. So I do think that it would be helpful for everyone. But perhaps as a minimal, perhaps positive note, sometimes small things can feel nice in this environment. I think that when we actually dealt now with the final legislative acts that were connected to the same-sex marriage, before it entered into force, I think that there was a very positive sort of attitude among experts, and also I think in the legal committee on sort of getting rid of the requirement of infertility or sterilization, whatever. So I actually feel that there's some kind of understanding. And I think this is one step, even if I do understand that it won't help everybody. But coming from politics, I mean, this is usually how it goes. It is a little bit by bit. Very rarely we manage to do big reforms. And usually when we ask for very big reforms, it may be that it actually slows, it makes it so easy always to have one point I disagree with, always. So I think we really need to think about this very carefully and think about what would be the best way to go forward. But it might be, unfortunately, that it could be step by step.
And I think Jyrki, sorry, and then you, but did you still want your...
Just asking the question, I was the only one listening to the other one. Reply to that.
Yeah, sorry, I think we may be a little bit too optimistic here if we say that the worst case is that nothing happens. Because if you look around what has been happening in Europe and around the world, it may be that the clock turns back.
Yeah.
If we are not vigilant, if we not follow what's happening, if we not see what kind of discussion is going on, for example, in the hate groups, in the internet. We have to be vigilant, we have to be awake. And I'm sorry to agree that this step-by-step method seems to be more efficient, even though it's time-consuming. And I'm so full of this, hearing all those things they have said about the marriage law in the parliament. But I think that it's worth enduring if we get the results we want. And we are going forward, but we have to be certain not to lose the momentum and be careful not to go back.
I apologize, I have to ask you to keep them a little short, because there are quite a few questions in the audience.
I totally agree with Jyrki, because I'm really worried about this climate change that we have had about in general, equality issues. And the discussion, the words, they got more harassed. They are hard words are used even in very normal conversations about equality, gender equality, and also equality of I would say all the minorities of different kind of minorities. But what I would like to point out is also the education we are giving in our health and social training for those who are studying to be nurses and doctors, for instance. There is very little knowledge from the basic education of those future professionals about these issues. And that's why they don't have the tools to discuss about these issues as well. So we need to make it one of these basic elements of the primary education for doctors and nurses also to recognize these issues and to give them tools to discuss about issues. That's why we will prevent lots of misunderstandings about, for instance, to be infertile or to be sterilized. Those words are difficult if you're not a professional to understand what's the difference between those two elements of even these discussions that we are having here. But I think that we need to go step by step. That is the only way to get these things through, and we need to be aware of this. atmosphere that we are facing also in Finland at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah. So concerning our colleagues from the other Nordic countries, I found it very inspiring, especially Jeanette's speech and what you said about already at what age you had felt your first need to express your gender that you felt at home, at ease with, and makes me also think about when we talk about medical school. My niece is in medical school, and I have to ask her now what are they actually teaching you there. Concerning incremental processes, I represent the less revolutionary part of the socialist parties in the country, so I also believe that we can do things step by step, and not maybe everything happens at once, but we have to keep on fighting. And concerning the party stance, I think in our Congress now earlier this year, we adopted a resolution where it quite clearly states that that identity should correspond to the legal gender that you have the right for that, and this process must be made much easier and less rigid. And we have to acknowledge the legislation, also the non-binary gender thinking or this, and then we need to cease the mutilation of gender genitalia on the basis of this. So I think this is, at least from our point of view, would be the how to continue about this process whenever we win the elections and come into the next government. Thank you.
I have an extremely quick note on the medical curriculum we actually go through. We have one course on endocrinology and genitals, and nowhere there do they discuss trans people. It's extremely, I'm using a strange word, cis-sexist. They're talking about gender that does never change and genitals. Well, it's important in medical school, but it completely erases trans people. And then we have, regarding sexual health and gender and sex, we have 1 hour of a seminar talking about those issues in the whole 6-year course. And that's the knowledge we are going to have.
In Helsinki.
In Helsinki. And I'm going to be the visible trans person that they have to stare at when they're talking about these things. In the future, maybe I will change something with my presence, hopefully.
So, at this moment, I think you had a question? Okay. But I do apologize, we are a little bit running out of time, so I'll let you know we're not going to be able to take all the questions now, but after the formal part, we all can go to the other room, to the library, and continue these conversations face to face without microphones. So if you can hold your questions to that, please do so, and otherwise, go ahead.
I'm Edison from Project Board, and I'm just gonna comment about the thing that maybe you don't want to hear, and that's why I'm gonna tell you about it on sterilization, fertility, and gender diversity. We really have to face our history that in Christianity we have 2 genders, and our background in eugenics and heteronormative refi of the ultimate ideal person, because there's other cultures with thousands of years of gender diversity back there, and as Ulrika said also about like our history about sterilization of transsexuals, people with mental issues, and Roma people. So I think that these current laws are still keeping that history very alive, and it's all very fine, and the advanced culture what it's doing.
I'm Klaus from Amnesty Denmark, and until quite recently we had laws corresponding quite well with what you're debating here. I'm thinking maybe you are having an over-focus on whether we should call it sterilization or being fertile or infertile or something. And I'm thinking you are maybe being too modest in your step-by-step, in your being incremental. Because basically what your law is reflecting is a power balance. A balance of the lawmaker, your parliament defining what is right, what is normal, what is not. Because there is no medical justification for any kind of demands of a medical nature in connection with with the legal gender recognition. None whatsoever. So really what you need to discuss is, do we want a law that basically says that we define what is normal, what is not. We define what can be perceived. When we're talking 1, 2 or more genders, it is still an attempt to place things within normal boxes, what we were always used to, which is why a transgender man cannot be fertile. We cannot have that because it conflicts with our sense of normality. So I think that is your challenge, not to define little technicalities, but to say, do we want laws that are basically saying that we decide who is right and who falls outside the scope.
Just a short comment to remind what kind of discussions we were having about the marriage law. We were quoting the Bible and analyzing what it means. We were not going to medical details.
Exactly. Yeah. It's ideal, but it's not the
You've had your hand up for a while, so please make it a very short one. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Samuel Drake from Left Youth. I would like to ask a question about a concern that many of my friends that are trans activists have had, which is related to this week, this Pride Week, and there is going to be this Pride March where are invited such groups such as police, Migri, and Kela, which are really peculiar organizations in a sense to be there. I would like to hear some opinions from you about is there anything interesting about it or not?
About the cops marching in the Pride March.
All of them, but especially cops.
I think it's really important that like institutions like this participate in the Pride movement. Last year we had the first officer in his uniform, and that became a big discussion within the army about their attitudes and stuff. I think it's really, really important, and I think it's a example of that we are going forward. But then again, now we're coming to this thing that you can call pinkwashing, because you also have big companies coming into the Pride because they try to build their image by participating in a thing like that. So there is a line somewhere, but I think the police is very important that they participate.
And when they participate, then we can require them to walk the walk, not only talk the talk.
Yeah.
And we have to remind them, hey, you were there. Why are you not living up to your promises?
And institutions as well, they comprise of individuals. I mean, we have to remember that there's tens of thousands of people working in this, so I think it's natural to tell that.
Yeah, we have the Pride in Oslo also this week, and on Saturday they're walking, the police are walking, the officers are walking, the nurses are walking, so no problem.
So I do have to cut this short. I'm very sorry. I remind you again that we want to continue this conversation on the other side of this wall a little later. So please, whoever can stay, do stay. And we will be sure to do this again, because it seems that there is a cry for Nordic cooperation, and definitely we want to keep building more unity within these countries and between the countries. And now I would like to welcome Richard Göller, the Senior Policy Officer of Transgender Europe, who has been involved and supporting about a dozen processes on legal gender recognition, and he has also been advocating with the Council of Europe for its historical resolution and the European Parliament for its support for legal gender recognition based on self-determination.
But before Richard takes the stand, I'd like to thank our panelists, and please take your seats and let's give the applause to
Thank you very very much. Thank you for the very warm welcome and the very interesting debate. I have now the very difficult task to kind of close this beginning of a conversation that we have had today. And before our colleagues from the Parliament are actually leaving, can I just hand something to you that might come in very handy when you continue the discussion? It's a tea.
Next panel.
The next panel, same topic.
Transgender Europe, we have more than 100 member organizations. We have been working a lot on legal gender recognition in a number of countries. And we have put together all of our knowledge on the practical issues on legal gender recognition, and I hope it will be helpful for you. All of this is, of course, online available when you define and discuss further the other questions, not only sterility here. So, so we have seen a lot of change in Europe, not only in the Nordic countries, and I wanted to bring you some of this here for the last couple of minutes. So how did it look like just 5 years back? Because we're talking about quite a new phenomenon. So that is our Trans-Red Europe map from May 2013. You have seen a form of this map today already. When we had 24 countries in Europe still requesting sterility and legal gender recognition. You see quite a bit of red also still like in the Nordic countries. And you see quite a bit of blue. These are 5 countries that didn't request sterility back then. And it wasn't possible to change your legal gender in about 16 countries in Europe. So how did this change? Now, 5 years later, you see most of Europe is turning blue. Most of the Nordic countries. You see Finland is the only country that's left with the marker of requesting sterility in there. And we are also fortunately down to only 10 countries without legal gender recognition procedures. So the question is for you then, for you in the Parliament, but also for you as activists, for you in other forums and other movements, so what is keeping you to change the situation? But sterility is not the only issue that we're talking about, and it has already been reflected today. One of the root causes of like why we're talking about sterilizing trans people, why we're talking about discriminating procedures, is actually because there's still this idea that trans people are in themselves defective, so to say, that we have a mental disorder, that we are still not only internationally but nationally classified as having severe mental behavioral issues. So at the moment, we still have 36 countries requesting a mental health diagnosis before we're actually able to change our documents. So just to hold a passport, just to hold an ID card, to let you travel without difficulties to pick up a parcel, you actually have to be declared as mentally ill. That is not only an attack to the dignity of the people concerned, but also it means it's complicating healthcare, it's complicating a lot of other matters. But even with mental health, the diagnosis requirement, that is not the last point. And I brought you like some 6 points here that I would like you to consider, apart from all the technical details that we have laid out in our publication on legal gender recognition. First of all, you have to understand the time is now. You want to engage in this conversation now. We're talking about 29 countries in Europe that are currently changing their legislation or just have recently done so. So Finland, please do wake up. It's time now. There will not be a better moment. You cannot wait for the perfect government or the perfect situation. You have approval rates of 68% of the Finnish population being in favor of legal gender recognition being available to trans people. What else do you need? It's really there. Secondly, don't legislate for the past. We have been talking about history quite a bit today, but the history shouldn't bind us. We should really talk about the other issues that are coming out now. These are complex issues, I understand that, but they are not impossible. It's not rocket science. And we have to address how non-binary people are represented in legal gender recognition in the legal system. We have to talk about how minors can have their rights recognized. We also have to talk about asylum seekers, how they can very early on have that gender recognized. We have to talk about data protection, how it can be ensured that an employer is actually following through, actually changing your employment certificates, how the schools are changing your educational certificates to make sure you actually really have the life according to a gender identity. And last but not least, we have to talk about the registration of trans parenthood to make sure that the lives of families of trans people is respected. Secondly, no human rights dilemmas anymore. You cannot put a person in the position to choose between one human right or the other. We have discussed that quite a bit today. That is really what we have to always put as a task for any legal solution that you come up with. And fourth, and that's one of the most important ones, nothing about it without us. It took nearly an hour today for trans people to take stage and to speak in their own right. I don't know whether you noticed. But we're here, and we're here to be listened to. And if you felt angry today because other people talked about your lives, about your faith, speak out of this anger. And don't be complacent about being fed with a step-by-step approach. We cannot wait any longer. People are dying. Within the trans community, we have 30 to 40% of trans people considering suicide. You have no other population group with such high numbers. This alone should be a reason to act. And this should make us speak out in our anger here as well. And also, the good thing is, if you involve trans people, you're more likely to get it right. And then to have actually like a good law in place. And that's what we're all about, right? And the last 2 points, political leadership. We have seen today great statements from politicians, from elected parliamentarians. Hold them accountable, engage in the dialogue. But also for you, or my message for you would be to say, continue to do that and actually talk to the ones who are not here today. Within the trans community, we have very little resources. We have to struggle every day for our survival, and we have to take care of all these legal issues. We can't do this for a very long time, so it is actually for you, our allies, to help us in that, and to support us in our struggle, and to push for it, even if it takes a bit longer. And all of this we cannot do without education, and you will have to repeat yourself. Whether you're an ally or a trans person, but we have to educate those people who don't know, and if they don't know, they can't understand, and so they can't support. So that is really my last point here, to keep on pushing hard, because that's what the world is about. Thanks.
On behalf of all the organizations, I would like to thank you all for participating. Thank you for the wonderful comments, the speeches, the ideas, the questions. We appreciate them all. And as Richard said, keep the word going, be vocal about these things. And if you want to participate more but don't know how, then you could follow Translaki or Transact Now campaigns online on social media, and it will give you more information on how to really participate as an individual also. And we hope that as many as possible will join us, still keep the conversation going today, and let's keep coming up with new ideas. Thank you.
And thank you, Kasper. Thank you so much. And thank you, Seta. Thank you, Seta. Terhi had to leave, but I'm looking at Vima now. Yeah, thank you, Seta. And thank you, Trasek, and all the activists of Amnesty, my home. And thanks for the international guests. You were brilliant. I'm really thrilled. I'm inspired to the top. Yes. And as I said in my presentation, this is the exact birthday of the Trans Act. Exactly 15 years ago, President Tarja Halonen signed this current legislation to be enforced. We are not going to celebrate the legislation itself, but as they are in their teenage years, this legislation, we are celebrating the changes to come, because we all know that in their teenage years the changes are huge. They can be very, very, very profound, and we are celebrating that. So please, we have some sparkling wine. Non-alcoholic is also available, with alcoholic also. I'm trying to say both. Yes, you don't have to worry. So please, when you are going to the library, I guess it's okay to take the class to the library, right? No spilling, no spilling. But you can take one class when you are going. And thank you so much for being so good.
Thank you.